It was an ordinary night in the small town of Willowbrook. The sky was clear, filled with stars, and the world was quiet. The only sounds that could be heard were the distant chirps of crickets and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. But that peace was shattered in an instant. Without warning, a brilliant flash of light tore across the sky. It wasn't like a shooting star. No, this was something different, something far more powerful. It was as if the very fabric of the night had been ripped open, and through the tear, something massive and glowing was falling fast. The light blazed brighter and brighter until it looked like the sun itself had crashed into the earth. The ground shook violently, sending windows rattling, dogs barking, and people waking up in confusion. A deafening roar filled the air. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. Even Hartley had been standing by his window, looking out at the stars, when the flash of light hit. He couldn't tear his eyes away from it. It was like watching a comet streak across the sky. But this wasn't a comet. It was something far more dangerous. He watched, frozen, as it fell closer and closer, the bright light blinding him for a moment before the crash sent shockwaves through the town. Even was no stranger to strange occurrences. He had always been the curious type, the kind to venture out on his own when everyone else was hiding in their homes. But this was beyond anything he had ever seen. Without a second thought, Evan grabbed his jacket, rushed out of his house, and ran toward the woods. The impact site was somewhere out there. He could already see smoke rising into the sky, the smell of burnt metal thick in the air. As he got closer, his heart began to race. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find, but he knew one thing. This was not a natural event. When he finally reached the crash site, the scene before him took his breath away. A large metallic object lay in the middle of the clearing. It was sleek and smooth, with strange glowing symbols etched across its surface. It didn't look like anything from Earth. The trees around the crash site had been bent, twisted, and scorched from the force of the impact, leaving a charred mark in the earth. Evan took a hesitant step forward, his eyes scanning the wreckage. There was no sign of anyone or anything moving, at least not yet. But then, as he ventured closer to the ship's hull, he noticed something stirring in the shadows. At first, it looked like a person, but as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized it was something far stranger. A figure, tall and glowing faintly, emerged from the wreckage. It moved with an eerie grace, but there was something wrong about the way it walked. The being seemed to struggle, its movements shaky, as if it had just experienced a great trauma. The figure's skin shimmered like stardust, almost translucent, reflecting the moonlight in a way Evan couldn't explain. For a moment, Evan stood frozen in place, unsure of what he was seeing. His mind raced as his body instinctively took a step back. Was this some sort of alien? But no, that couldn't be right. This was impossible. The figure seemed to sense Evan's presence. It turned, and Evan saw the eyes. Glowing, intense, like twin stars that seemed to pierce into his very soul. They weren't human eyes, not even closed, but they had a strange familiarity, something haunting and beautiful all at once. Evan's heart pounded in his chest. He should run. He knew he should. But something kept him rooted to the spot. He had always been curious, always wanted to understand things that no one else could. But now, standing before this being from the stars, he wasn't so sure of what he was getting himself into. The figure, who, Evan was now certain, was not human, took a step toward him. Its movements were graceful but slow, as though each step took more effort than it should have. And then, before Evan could react, the figure collapsed to the ground with a soft thud, a look of pain flashing across its alien face. "Are you okay?" Evan whispered, his voice trembling as he knelt beside the creature. It was the first time in his life he had ever spoken to something not human, and the words felt strange in his mouth. He barely knew what to say. The alien's lips parted, but no sound came out. It was struggling to breathe, its chest heaving as if it were fighting for air. But that wasn't possible, was it? Whatever this creature was, it didn't belong to Earth. It wasn't made for Earth's air or its gravity. Evan could see that the alien's body was slowly beginning to glow, like a soft pulse, as if it were drawing energy from somewhere, or maybe trying to keep itself alive. His instincts told him to leave, to run, but something kept him from doing so. He couldn't just leave this creature out here, alone, injured, and confused. "I won't hurt you," Evan said quietly, though he had no idea whether the alien could even understand him. He gently placed his hand on its shoulder, trying to offer comfort, though he wasn't sure if it could even feel it. The warmth of his touch seemed to cause a reaction. The alien's body shuddered, and then, to Evan's horror, it began to absorb the energy from his body, pulling at his very life force. Evan gasped, feeling a strange pulling sensation. It was as if his strength was being drained away, his energy siphoned into the alien's body. It wasn't painful at first, but soon he began to feel lightheaded, his legs weak as though he might collapse at any moment. The alien's eyes flashed again, this time with an almost desperate intensity. It was feeding on him, drawing on his energy in an attempt to survive. The realization hit Evan like a lightning bolt. This creature wasn't just stranded on Earth. It was using him as its source of power. Fear rushed through him, and instinctively, he tried to pull away. But he found that he couldn't. The alien's grip on him tightened, stronger than he expected for something so frail. It was as if it had no choice, as if it needed his life force to survive. For a brief moment, everything around Evan seemed to fade away. His head grew heavy, his vision blurred, and his body felt numb. He was losing himself, his energy being drained faster and faster. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the alien released its hold on him. Evan stumbled back, gasping for breath, his heart racing in his chest. His body felt weak, but the alien had let him go. It was looking at him now, its expression unreadable, but there was something in those glowing eyes that made Evan feel a strange mix of pity and fear. The alien didn't speak. It didn't need to. There was a kind of understanding in the silence between them. Whatever this creature was, whatever it had come from, it was not evil. It was simply desperate. And as Evan stared down at the alien, he couldn't help but feel that their fates were somehow tied together now. The creature needed him, but at what cost? Evan had no answers. He only knew that whatever this being was, it wasn't just a visitor from another world. It was something much more complicated, something that he was now a part of. And he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a terrible mistake. The next morning, Evan woke up with a headache. His mind felt foggy, as if he had been in a dream that he couldn't quite remember. The strange events of the previous night kept swirling in his head. He hadn't imagined it, had he? No, he was sure of it. He had seen the alien. He had felt it. But now, in the quiet of his bedroom, it almost felt like it had all been a hallucination. He shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts. No, it couldn't have been a dream. He had been drained, weak, his body feeling as though it had been sucked dry of energy. That wasn't something you just dreamed about. It had been real, but what did it mean? Evan had to go back to the crash site. He couldn't just ignore what had happened. Something inside him was pulling him back there, like an invisible thread. He didn't know why, but he felt like he had to understand what that creature was, what it wanted, and why it had drained him of his energy. As he walked through the woods to the site, the familiar surroundings of the trees and bushes didn't comfort him like they usually did. His senses were heightened. The air felt thick with tension, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to hum with something unknown. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, waiting. He had no idea what he would find when he arrived, but he knew it wasn't going to be a simple answer. When he finally reached the clearing where the ship had crashed, it was eerily quiet. The once chaotic scene, with trees bent and scorched from the impact, had calmed. The wreckage of the alien ship still lay in the center of the clearing, but the strange glowing symbols on its surface had dimmed. Everything seemed frozen in time, like a picture that had been taken in the middle of a story, with no one to finish it. But then he heard it, a soft sound, like a faint breath. His heart raced as he turned toward the noise. Emerging from behind the wreckage was the alien. She was standing upright, though her movements were slow and cautious. Her skin shimmered faintly in the morning light, like liquid silver, and her eyes glowed with a soft, ethereal light. She looked different this time, not as weak as before, but still fragile. She seemed to be gathering her strength, yet there was something about her that felt different. She was more alert, more aware of her surroundings. Evan's first instinct was to run, to turn and flee, but his legs felt rooted to the ground. The connection he had with this alien, this being, was stronger than he realized. He couldn't simply walk away. He couldn't leave her out here alone again. The alien turned her head slowly, her glowing eyes locking onto his. Evan felt a shiver run down his spine. He couldn't look away, despite the fear that gripped him. It was like she was searching him, studying him, as if she knew something he didn't. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. Evan didn't know what to do. What was she? Why was she here? And why had she drained his energy the way she had? Are you okay?" Evan asked, his voice breaking the silence. It felt strange asking, as if the words weren't enough to explain what had happened, but he had to say something. The alien's head tilted slightly, as if trying to understand his words. She didn't speak. Instead, she took a step closer to him. Evan didn't move, not out of bravery, but because he felt that same invisible pull again, urging him to stay still. For a moment, he thought she might attack him, that she might drain him again, but instead, the alien reached out a hand. The movement was hesitant, unsure. Evan didn't know what to do. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body remained frozen in place. As the alien's hand drew closer, he saw the faint glow around her fingertips. It wasn't threatening, but it was undeniably powerful. And then, just as quickly as she had reached out, the alien stopped. Her hand hovered in front of him, and she looked at him again, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and something deeper, something that almost looked like fear. Evan slowly extended his hand, unsure of what was happening, but feeling a strange sense of calm settle over him. The alien didn't pull away. In fact, she moved closer, her hand coming to rest gently against his. When their skin touched, Evan felt it again. The pull, the connection. But this time, it wasn't draining. It was different. It wasn't painful. It was as if their very energy was merging, creating a bond between them that he couldn't fully understand. The alien's glowing eyes softened, and for the first time since he had encountered her, Evan saw something human in her expression. It was subtle, a flicker of emotion that seemed to pass through her, but it was there. She wasn't just a creature from another world. She was something more. And somehow, he knew that she was more than just a being who needed to feed. The silence stretched on, and Evan's mind raced. He had no idea what to say, how to explain what was happening between them. He had always believed in the possibility of aliens. He had read all the books, watched the documentaries, and studied the stars, but none of it had prepared him for this. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was something else entirely. Finally, the alien broke the silence, but not with words. She made a soft sound, almost like a hum, and Evan felt it deep in his chest. It wasn't a language he could understand, but somehow he knew that it was an attempt at communication. She was trying to reach him, to tell him something. As if understanding that he couldn't respond with words, Evan slowly lowered his hand from hers and took a step back, his heart still pounding. He had to think. He couldn't let fear control him. This alien, whatever she was, needed something from him, maybe more than just energy. Maybe she needed help. Maybe she was trying to save herself, or maybe she was trying to save her people. He looked into her eyes, his voice low and uncertain. I don't know how I can help you, but I can try. The alien's gaze seemed to soften even further, and she nodded slowly, as if she understood. There was a long pause, and then she stepped back, her body glowing softly, as if gathering strength. Even watched her for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He had no answers, no plan, but one thing was clear. This encounter, this meeting, was the beginning of something much bigger. This alien, Lyra, wasn't just some lost traveler. She was a creature of great power, one that had the ability to change everything. And somehow, Ivan had become a part of her journey. Whether he wanted it or not, whether he was ready or not, their fates were tied together now. He could feel it. It was a bond that couldn't be broken, and no matter what happened next, Ivan knew he couldn't walk away. Days passed since Ivan's encounter with Lyra, the alien who had crash-landed on Earth. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about what she was, where she had come from, and why she had drained his energy. It was hard to ignore the fact that something so mysterious and powerful had crossed his path. But as the days went by, the odd bond between them deepened. It wasn't just a strange connection anymore. It was something much stronger. Lyra had begun staying near the woods, just outside the small town of Willowbrook. She still didn't speak, but her presence was undeniable. Every time Ivan saw her, the glow of her skin seemed brighter, more intense. It wasn't just from the sunlight anymore. There was something in her that was feeding off the energy of the world around her. But that wasn't all. Ivan could feel it too, as if the alien's hunger for energy had somehow linked to his own need to understand what she was going through. He didn't know if he was the cause or just a passive observer, but it was clear that she was growing stronger. And with that strength came something else, something dangerous. At first, Ivan had been afraid of her, but that fear was slowly replaced with a strange feeling of responsibility. Lyra had saved him in a way. By giving him a connection to her, she had shown him a part of herself that no one else would ever understand. But he was also afraid of what she might become. There was something about the way her hunger had changed her, something darker. She wasn't just feeding on energy. She was growing more powerful, more unpredictable. One afternoon, Ivan decided to visit her again, hoping to find some way to help. He walked through the woods, the same path he had taken before, though the air felt different this time. There was an uncomfortable stillness in the air, like the calm before a storm. As he neared the spot where he had last seen Lyra, he stopped. The ground beneath him was scorched, the trees blackened and bent, as if something had taken all the life out of the place. His heart raced. The town wasn't far, and the thought that Lyra might be drawing energy from everything around her, it terrified him. When he finally reached the clearing, he saw her. Lyra was standing still, her face turned towards the sky, her eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a chill down Ivan's spine. Her once soft, shimmering skin was now brighter, almost blinding, but there was a darkness in her expression that he hadn't seen before. She didn't look the same. There was something wrong about her. Lyra? Ivan called, his voice trembling as he stepped forward. Are you okay? She didn't respond at first. She didn't even move. Ivan's stomach twisted with fear. What was happening to her? The once fragile, almost innocent being he had helped was changing. Something deep inside her was pushing her to take more than just the energy she had taken from him that first night. Then, Lyra's head snapped to the side, her glowing eyes locking onto him. She took a step forward, her movements slow but purposeful. Ivan felt a shiver run down his spine. There was no doubt now. Something was very wrong. Her voice broke the silence, though it was low and strained. I need more. Ivan's heart skipped a beat. The words sent a wave of dread through him. He had known she needed energy to survive, but now it seemed like she was desperate, almost ravenous. Her voice cracked, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier, filled with a sense of hunger that couldn't be ignored. I don't know what you need, but I can't keep giving you everything. Even said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and concern. "You can't keep feeding like this. It's not right." Lyra took another step, her eyes never leaving his. She seemed to struggle, as if trying to understand his words. But then, as if the hunger inside her had won, she reached out, her hand glowing with that same energy she had drawn from him before. Even instinctively took a step back, but there was nowhere to run. Her presence was all around him now, suffocating and overwhelming. You don't understand," Lyra said, her voice almost pleading. "I need this. I need to survive." Even could see the pain in her eyes. The hunger, the need for energy, wasn't something she wanted. It wasn't something she could control. He could feel it in her. This was her only way of surviving. But the more she fed, the stronger she became, and the more dangerous she was. She wasn't just drawing from him anymore. She was taking everything she could, from the trees, the land, and even the very air itself. "Lyra, stop. You can't do this," Even shouted, panic rising in his chest. But it was too late. Before Even could react, Lyra lunged toward him. Her touch was colder this time, more intense. As soon as her hand made contact with his arm, a wave of electricity shot through his body. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. His entire being seemed to light up from the inside out, as if his energy was being pulled out of him in one massive rush. He couldn't move. His body was frozen in place, unable to escape the torrent of energy that was being drained from him. "Please, don't," Even gasped, his voice weak as he tried to pull away. But her grip only tightened. It was as if she was desperately holding on to him, taking everything she could from him, as if his energy was the only thing that could save her. Even could feel his strength fading, his vision blurring. He didn't know how much longer he could last. He didn't know if he could survive this. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, Lyra released him. Even collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his body weak and trembling. He couldn't understand what had happened. Why had she gone so far? He had always known she needed energy to survive. But this wasn't just survival anymore. This was something more primal, more dangerous. Lyra stood a few feet away, her body glowing brighter than ever. She was breathing heavily, her eyes filled with an emotion Even couldn't quite read. She wasn't speaking, but the look in her eyes told him everything. She wasn't in control anymore. The hunger had taken over. She needed more, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I didn't want this," Lyra whispered, her voice full of guilt. She looked down at her hands, as if she didn't recognize them anymore. I don't know how to stop. I don't know what to do." Even slowly got to his feet, his legs shaking. He felt weak, but not as bad as before. The energy she had taken from him was slowly returning, but the fear still lingered. The bond between them had changed. What had once been a strange connection had now become something far more dangerous. He couldn't keep allowing her to feed off him, but he also couldn't just walk away. He could feel it. She was lost in this hunger, and he was the only one who could help her. "I don't know how to fix this," Lyra Even said, his voice calm, though his heart was racing. "But you have to fight it. You can't keep taking from me, from everyone else." Lyra lowered her head, the glow around her body dimming slightly. "I'm sorry, Even. I don't know how much longer I can hold it back. The hunger is too strong." Even stepped closer to her, despite the lingering fear. He had to find a way to stop this before it was too late, before she became something he couldn't save. "I'll help you, Lyra. We'll find another way," Even promised, though he wasn't sure how. He didn't know what they could do to stop this, but he couldn't let her slip away. She was more than just an alien. She was more than just a creature in need of energy. She had become something else to him, something he couldn't ignore. The bond between them was undeniable. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper. And Even wasn't ready to give up on her. Not yet. Even lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the last few days replaying in his mind over and over. He had always been someone who liked to keep his life simple, his days predictable. He had his routine, his friends, his quiet town. But now, everything had changed. His world had collided with something unimaginable, something beyond his understanding. Lyra, the alien from another world, had become a part of his life in ways he couldn't fully explain. The bond between them had grown stronger each day, and Even didn't know what to make of it. At first, it had been a simple connection. She needed his energy, and he felt a strange pull toward her. But now, it felt deeper, like they were tethered together by something far more powerful. He couldn't deny it anymore. He was part of her story, part of her journey, and somehow she was becoming a part of his. He turned over in bed, his eyes closing as sleep finally began to claim him. But just as he was drifting off, he felt it. The same pull he had felt ever since that first night. It wasn't physical, but it was there, like a thread tied to his chest, tugging at him gently. Without thinking, he sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. It was Lyra. She was calling to him, not with words, but with a deep, silent request that he couldn't ignore. He quickly threw on some clothes and ran out the door, heading toward the woods. The feeling of urgency washed over him, his feet moving faster than he had expected. The bond between them wasn't just pulling him toward her, it was pushing him to do something, to act, and he couldn't ignore it. The woods seemed different tonight. The air was thick with an unfamiliar energy. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches creaking as if they were alive. Even's heart raced as he moved deeper into the forest. The path he had walked countless times now felt like a maze, the familiar trees seeming to shift around him. It was as though the forest itself had become part of whatever was happening between him and Lyra. When he reached the clearing, he saw her standing there, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Her body shimmered in the darkness, like a living constellation, the glow from her skin casting faint shadows around her. She didn't look the same as she had before. The energy around her felt different, darker, heavier. It was as if the hunger she had felt before had grown, and now it had turned into something more dangerous. Lyra, Even called softly, approaching her cautiously. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes were closed, and for a moment, Even wondered if she even realized he was there. But then, slowly, her eyes opened, and they locked onto his. The familiar glow was still there, but it was mixed with something else, a sadness, a longing, and something Evan couldn't quite place. It was as though she was trying to tell him something, but didn't know how. "I didn't mean for it to happen again," Lyra whispered, her voice low and shaky. "I didn't want to hurt you." Even stepped closer to her, his heart aching. He could see the internal struggle in her eyes. She wasn't in control of what was happening to her, and that hurt him. It wasn't just about the energy anymore. Lyra was more than that. She was lost, struggling to understand what was happening to her, and in turn, she was pulling him deeper into her world, into her pain. "I know, Lyra," Even said, his voice gentle. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but you need to stop. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep draining everything around you." Lyra's eyes flickered, and she turned away, staring out into the distance. The wind rustled the leaves, carrying with it a sense of restlessness. She was holding something back, something that was too heavy for her to bear alone. Even could feel it, the weight of her isolation, the burden of her hunger. "I don't know how to stop it," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The hunger is part of me. It's how I survive. Without it, I won't make it." Even felt his heart twist. He knew what she meant. She wasn't just feeding to stay alive. She was fighting for her very existence. The alien world she came from was far away, and whatever had happened to her ship, whatever had brought her here, had left her stranded, alone, and vulnerable. The hunger was her only means of survival, and yet it was also destroying her. "You don't have to do this alone," Even said, stepping closer, his hand outstretched. "I'll help you, Lyra. I'll find a way to help you. You don't have to keep feeding off me or anyone else." Lyra looked at his hand, her eyes wide. For a moment, she seemed to hesitate. She was a creature from another world, and here he was, just a human, offering to help her. It seemed impossible, but the bond between them was undeniable. He had felt it growing, and now he could see it in her eyes. She wasn't alone anymore. She had him. "I don't know how you can help me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "The hunger is too strong. It takes everything." Ethan felt a rush of determination flood through him. He couldn't just stand there and let her suffer. He couldn't let the bond between them turn into something destructive. There had to be another way. He wouldn't let her become a monster because of her need to survive. "I don't know how either," Ethan admitted, "but we'll figure it out. Together." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra smiled. It was a small, uncertain smile, but it was enough. Ethan's heart swelled as he realized that she trusted him. The bond they shared had grown beyond just a need for energy. It had become something more. It was a promise, one he was willing to keep. But their journey wasn't going to be easy. There was still so much about Lyra's powers that neither of them understood. And as the bond between them grew stronger, Ethan knew that there was more to this connection than he had first thought. The hunger was just one part of it. There were mysteries to uncover, dangers to face, and sacrifices to be made. Lyra looked at him, her gaze softening. "I don't know if I can control it," she said, "but I'll try." Ethan nodded, his voice steady. "You don't have to do it alone. We'll figure it out together." They stood in the clearing for a long time, the silence between them peaceful for once. The moonlight bathed them both in its soft glow, and for the first time since Lyra's crash, Ethan felt like they were on the same side, working together toward a common goal. But deep inside, Ethan knew that the bond between them wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, something he couldn't yet understand. And as they stood together, facing the unknown, Ethan couldn't help but wonder how far this connection would take them, and what price they would have to pay to keep it. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Ethan had always been someone who liked to have everything figured out, someone who could see the future in a clear, defined way. But now, everything was blurry. There were no answers, only questions. Lyra had become a part of his life in ways he couldn't have imagined, and though they had made a promise to help each other, Ethan felt the weight of what they were up against. The hunger that controlled her, the bond between them that grew stronger every day. It all felt like a ticking clock. How long before the bond consumed them both? It had been a week since their last meeting in the woods, and Ethan hadn't seen Lyra since then. Every night, he would walk through the forest, searching for her, but she was always gone by the time he arrived. She was still out there. He knew it. Somewhere. But she was distancing herself from him, and Ethan couldn't understand why. It was almost like she was trying to push him away, to protect him from what was becoming inevitable. But he couldn't stand the thought of her being alone, of her struggling with the hunger on her own. The bond between them wasn't just a connection, it was a lifeline. But it was also a curse. The more time that passed, the more Ethan could feel the pull. It wasn't just about the energy anymore. He could feel her emotions, her pain, her confusion. He could hear her thoughts in the back of his mind, a soft whisper in the quiet moments of his day. But no matter how much they shared, no matter how much they connected, there was one thing Ethan couldn't ignore: the choice. The decision that loomed over them both. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Ethan walked through the woods again. This time, he didn't call for her. He didn't shout her name into the quiet air. He just walked, letting the bond guide him, trusting it to lead him to her. The forest was still, and the evening air was warm, heavy with the scent of pine and earth. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him, as if the woods were holding its breath, waiting for something. Finally, after what felt like hours, he saw her. She was standing near the clearing, her back to him, her head tilted slightly as if listening for something in the wind. The familiar glow around her body was dimmer than usual, almost like the light was fading from within her. Evan's heart ached. Something was wrong. She wasn't the same. "Lyra," Evan called softly, taking a few cautious steps forward. She turned around slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was a sadness in them that he hadn't seen before. It was like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and Evan wasn't sure if he could bear it too. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, her gaze fixed on him, as if she was trying to decide whether or not to let him in. "I've been trying to protect you," Lyra finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been staying away because I don't want you to get hurt. The hunger, it's getting worse. Even, it's consuming me. And if I can't stop it." Her words trailed off, and Evan could feel the fear in her voice. It was like she was holding herself back, trying to keep him from understanding just how much she was struggling. He knew that she was scared, but he was just as terrified. Terrified of losing her, of letting the hunger tear them both apart. But most of all, he was scared of the choice they would eventually have to make. "I don't want you to push me away, Lyra," Evan said, his voice firm. "I don't want you to fight this alone. We can figure this out. Together." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, as if weighing his words. When she opened them again, there was a new kind of resolve in her expression, but it was mixed with a deep sadness. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "The longer I stay here, the more I draw from you. The bond, it's becoming too strong. If I keep feeding, I'll lose myself. I'll become something else, something I don't want to be. But if I break the bond, if I leave, I might not survive." Evan's chest tightened at her words. She was torn between two impossible choices: feed and lose herself, or leave and face the possibility of death. There was no easy answer. The bond between them was pulling them together, but it was also pushing them apart. The more they connected, the more dangerous it became. Evan couldn't bear the thought of losing her, but he also couldn't stand the idea of her sacrificing everything for him. He loved her in a way he hadn't even fully realized until this moment. It wasn't just the bond. It wasn't just about helping her survive. It was about her, about the person she was. He wanted to save her, but he didn't know how. "I don't care what it takes, Lyra," Evan said, his voice filled with desperation. "I'll find a way to help you. We can beat this. We can figure it out. I won't let you go." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Evan thought she might say something that would change everything. But instead, she just shook her head slowly. "You don't understand," she whispered. "This is bigger than us. It's not something we can just fix. The hunger, it's part of me. And the bond, it's becoming part of you too. You're changing, Evan. I can feel it. The more you're connected to me, the more the hunger affects you. If I stay, if I keep feeding, I could destroy everything, including you." Evan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't realized the danger that the bond was causing him. He had always thought it was just a connection, something that tied them together. But now he understood. The longer he stayed connected to her, the more it would pull him into the darkness. The more it would change him, make him just as lost as she was. "I don't care," Evan said firmly, stepping closer to her. "I don't care if it changes me. I'm not going to leave you. You're not alone in this. We can fight it together. You don't have to make this choice alone." Lyra's expression softened, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. She seemed to be fighting something inside herself, a part of her that wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that they could somehow overcome this. But another part of her, the part that had been consumed by the hunger, was pulling her in a different direction. "You don't understand," she repeated, her voice breaking. "If we stay connected, if we keep feeding this bond, we might both lose ourselves. The hunger will control us. I won't be me anymore, and you won't be you. The choice isn't just about surviving. It's about who we're willing to become." Evan stood in front of her, the weight of her words sinking in. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if they could survive this bond, or if they were already too far gone. But one thing was clear. This was the moment. The moment where they would have to decide. Lyra's eyes searched his, looking for something, and for a moment, even thought she might choose to leave. But then she stepped closer to him, reaching out for his hand, her fingers trembling. "Maybe there is another way," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Maybe together, we can find a way to stop this without losing ourselves." Even took her hand, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever." For the first time, in what felt like forever, Lyra smiled. It was a small, fragile smile, but it was enough. They were both scared, but they weren't alone anymore. The choice wasn't just about surviving. It was about fighting for each other, fighting to keep the bond from destroying them. Together, they might have a chance. The wind rustled the leaves around them, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the choice they would make. It was no longer just about the hunger. It was about the strength of the bond between them, and whether they could break free from the darkness that threatened to pull them under. The days were growing shorter, and the world around Even seemed to darken with each passing moment. The decision had been made. Lyra had stayed, choosing to fight alongside him rather than run. But the weight of their choice was heavy, and Even could feel it pressing down on both of them. They had made a promise to face the hunger together, but as the days passed, it became clear that the path ahead was going to be far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. They had spent countless hours trying to find a solution, researching, experimenting, and looking for any sign of hope. But nothing had worked. The hunger inside Lyra was growing stronger, and the bond between them was only deepening. Every time Lyra fed, the energy she took from him, from others, seemed to make her stronger. But it also made her more unstable. The longer they fought it, the more it seemed like they were both teetering on the edge of something they couldn't control. Even could feel the pull, the ache in his chest whenever she was near. He could hear her thoughts, feel her emotions, and it wasn't just the bond anymore. It was something more powerful, something darker. There were moments when he almost forgot where he ended, and she began. The lines between them were blurring, and that scared him more than anything. That night, Even found himself in the forest again, the moonlight casting a pale glow over the ground. It had become their meeting place, the place where they could be together without the world watching. But tonight, there was something different in the air. The usual calm of the woods was replaced with a tense silence, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Even's heart was pounding in his chest as he made his way toward the clearing where Lyra usually waited. The closer he got, the stronger the feeling of dread grew. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, a gnawing sense of unease. When he reached the clearing, he stopped in his tracks. Lyra was standing in the center, her body glowing faintly in the darkness. But she wasn't alone. A figure stood beside her, tall, shadowy, and intimidating. Even's blood ran cold as he recognized the figure. It was the same one he had seen in his dreams, the same presence that had haunted his thoughts ever since he first encountered Lyra. It was the one who had been pulling at the bond, the one who had been waiting for this moment. The figure stepped forward, its form shifting like smoke, and Even instinctively took a step back. But Lyra didn't move. She stood still, her eyes locked on the figure with a strange, distant look. "Lyra." Even's voice was barely above a whisper, but the moment the words left his lips, the figure turned toward him, its eyes glowing red like burning coals. "Even," Lyra said, her voice sounding different, colder, more detached. "It's time. The bond between us is complete." Even's heart skipped a beat. The bond between them had been growing stronger every day. But this wasn't what he had imagined. This wasn't the way he had envisioned their fight. "What do you mean, Lyra?" Even asked, his voice trembling. "What's happening?" Who is that?